Welcome back, my dear travelers. Tonight, we find ourselves once more beneath the quiet glow of the stars, ready to journey through the winding paths of Middle-earth's past. This is a tale of power and ambition, of gifts given and prices paid. A story whispered through the ages, shaping the fate of elves, men, and dwarves alike. The rings of power are more than mere treasures. They are echoes of a time long past, when great hands forged wonders beyond reckoning. But power is a tricky thing, and even the brightest creations can cast long shadows. But before we continue, lovely listeners, I want you to comment down below where you're from and what time it currently is. Now, let's settle in. Wrap yourself in a warm blanket and let the flickering firelight guide us. We will wander through ages lost to time, unraveling a tale both beautiful and perilous. Close your eyes, breathe deep, and let Middle-earth's story unfold. In the quiet years after Morgoth's defeat and the breaking of Beleriand, Middle-earth entered a time of relative peace, yet the echoes of war still lingered. The world had changed, and the elves who remained in Middle-earth sought to rebuild what had been lost. Some journeyed westward, departing for the undying lands, while others turned east, seeking to establish new realms of beauty and knowledge. Among them was Celebrimbor, the grandson of Feanor, a name bound to both brilliance and sorrow. Unlike his grandfather, whose fire had burned hot with pride and vengeance, Celebrimbor was a quieter, more measured craftsman. He did not seek dominion, nor did he yearn for power over others. Instead, his heart lay in creation, the forging of great works that would outlast the ravages of time. This desire led him to the land of Eregion, a realm founded by the Noldor near the western entrance of Khazad-dûm. It was here that Celebrimbor gathered a fellowship of master smiths, the Gwaithai Madain, who were unmatched in their skill. Under Celebrimbor's leadership, Eregion flourished, becoming a center of craftsmanship and learning. The elves there held a close bond with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, something rare in Middle-earth. They shared knowledge, traded precious materials, and worked together in friendship, unlike many of their kin who remained wary of the Norgrim. With mithril from the mines of the dwarves and the artistry of the elven smiths, Eregion became a realm of unrivaled craftsmanship, its works prized above all others. Yet even in these golden years, Middle-earth was not free of lurking shadows. It was in these days that a stranger came among the elves, calling himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. He was fair to look upon, wise beyond measure, and his words were like music, offering knowledge, guidance, and secrets of craftsmanship unknown even to the greatest of the Noldor. Anatar spoke of how Middle-earth could be made more beautiful, how the decay of time could be halted, how suffering could be lessened. He brought gifts not of war but of creation, teaching ways to shape the world with power beyond mere skill. To the elves of Eregion, His arrival seemed like a blessing. Celebrimbor, eager for knowledge, welcomed him, as did most of the Gwaithai Myrdain. Under Anatar's teachings, their craft reached new heights. He showed them ways to weave enchantment into metal, to bind power within their creations, to forge wonders beyond their previous limits. The smiths of Eregion embraced his teachings, believing they were building a future where beauty and strength could endure, untouched by the slow decay of ardor. Yet not all were so trusting. In Linden, far to the west, Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, and his herald Elrond refused Anatar's counsel, sensing something amiss. Galadriel, too, harbored doubts. Though she resided in Eregion for a time, she remained wary of the stranger, feeling an unease that could not be explained. But Eregion stood apart from Linden, and Celebrimbor owed no fealty to Gil-galad. Confident in his own wisdom, he dismissed their warnings. The elves of Eregion, proud of their craft, believed that they could wield knowledge without being ensnared by it. And so, Anatar remained among them, whispering, guiding, and slowly, subtly, weaving his deception. Under Anatar's instruction, the elves of Eregion began forging rings of power. These were not yet the great rings that would shape the fate of Middle-earth, but rather lesser rings, works of great beauty and enchantment, each designed to enhance and preserve. Some granted heightened senses, others extended life or strengthened the mind. These early rings were experiments, tests of what was possible. Through them, the smiths refined their craft, pushing their abilities to limits never before reached. With each creation, they became more skilled, more ambitious. They wove greater spells into the metal, binding power into delicate forms. But Anatar watched closely. He had not come to simply guide them. He had come to shape their work to his own ends. Though he did not yet reveal his full purpose, he steered their efforts toward what he desired. The elves believed themselves in control of their craft, but in truth, they were walking a path of his design. For Anatar was no benevolent teacher. He was Sauron, the Dark Lord reborn. Though the elves of Eregion did not yet know it, they were laying the foundation for a far greater scheme, one that would not be revealed until it was too late. The knowledge Anatar had given them was not a gift freely given. It was the bait in a trap, one that would soon be sprung. The lesser rings were only the beginning. The real work had yet to begin, the forging of the great rings, those that would shape the fate of Middle-earth. And soon, Celebrimbor and his smiths would take the next step, crafting wonders beyond anything they had ever made before. But with each hammer's strike, each rune etched into metal, the web of Sauron's deception grew tighter. The elves thought they were working toward a brighter future. They did not yet see the shadow that loomed behind them. Time passed, and the elven smiths of Eregion continued to push the limits of their craft, their ambition growing with each passing season. The lesser rings had been only the beginning, proof of what was possible, stepping stones towards something greater. Under Anatar's guidance, their knowledge deepened, and their creations became more refined, more powerful. Yet even as they worked, shaping wonders beyond anything seen before, they did not realize they were moving ever closer to the purpose he had long intended for them. These were not mere trinkets of skill or simple enchantments. They were creations of astonishing might, meant to grant their wearers strength beyond that of ordinary beings. Under Anatar's guidance, the smiths wove potent magic into their work, binding within the rings the ability to preserve, to dominate, and to extend life itself. Each one was imbued with a fraction of the wisdom and power that had been gifted to them by their teacher. Yet none suspected the true nature of the knowledge they had received. One by one, 16 mighty rings were forged, each bearing its own unique properties, but bound by the same underlying design. These were intended to be instruments of order, means by which Middle-earth could be guided and sustained against the slow decay of time. In the hearts of the elven smiths, there was no malice, only ambition, the desire to build a world unmarred by the sorrows of the past. But the power they poured into their creations was not their own. Anatar was always present, always watching. Though the hands that shaped the rings were elven, the will that guided them was his. The knowledge he had gifted was not freely given, but carefully placed, ensuring that each ring was made according to a plan only he fully understood. The smiths of Eregion believed they were achieving mastery over their craft, but in truth, they were crafting the very tools of their undoing. Yet even as these rings neared completion, Celebrimbor was not satisfied. Though Anatar had given them much, there was a part of him that still sought to create something greater, something untouched by the influence of their mysterious teacher. And so, in secret, he began a work of his own. From the finest materials and with all the skill he possessed, Celebrimbor forged 3 rings unlike any that had come before. These were not made with dominion in mind, nor with the intent to control, but rather to preserve. Vilya, Nenya, and Naya, crafted with all the wisdom of the elves, and untouched by Anatar's hand. They would not grant their bearers power over others, nor would they corrupt the souls of those who wore them. Instead, they would slow decay, safeguard beauty, and strengthen those who sought to protect rather than rule. These were the greatest works of Celebrimbor's life, and in them he placed all the hopes of his people. With them, the elves could withstand the long years ahead, maintaining their lands against the wear of time and the weight of sorrow. Yet, even as he completed them, a shadow crept over his heart. A doubt, faint but insistent, whispering that the knowledge they had used was not wholly their own. That perhaps, in their eagerness, they had been too willing to trust. The 3 rings were set apart, their power different from that of the others. But the 16 remained, their purpose unchanged, their fate unwritten. For now, they rested in a region, waiting for the day they would be gifted to those deemed worthy. They had been made with the best intentions, crafted to bring order and prosperity. But none yet knew the truth. None yet understood that they were not truly free, that an unseen chain had already been forged around them, binding them to a master who had not yet revealed himself. The work was finished. The rings of power had been made. And far away, though none could yet see it, the trap was beginning to close. Eregion stood at the height of its glory, its forges filled with the glow of creation, its people unaware that the seeds of their undoing had already been sown. The rings of power had been forged, wonders of unparalleled craftsmanship. Each one bound with magic meant to preserve, to enhance, to bring prosperity to those who wielded them. But the hands that had guided their making had never been truly benevolent. Anatar, the so-called Lord of Gifts, had given knowledge freely, yet his presence had always concealed a hidden purpose. And then, without warning, he was gone. None in Eregion knew why their teacher had vanished, nor did they question it. The work had been completed, the great rings forged, and if he had departed, it was of little consequence. But Anatar had not simply left, he had returned to Mordor. And it was there, in the Land of Shadow, that he cast aside his disguise. He was Sauron, the Dark Lord reborn, and at last his patience had reached its end. The rings had been created, but they were not yet his. Though his hand had shaped them in secret, the elves still wielded them freely, untouched by his will. That would soon change. In the fiery heart of Mount Doom, Sauron set to work on his greatest creation. A ring unlike any other, one that would bind all the others to him. The One Ring was not merely a tool, it was an extension of himself, a vessel for his power, forged with a singular purpose, dominion. As he shaped it, he poured into it the very essence of his strength, sacrificing a part of himself so that through it he might rule all who bore the rings of power. Its surface was plain, unadorned, a simple golden band. But its appearance was a deception, for within it burned the will of Sauron himself. No enchantment could match it, no craft could undo it. Through it, he would master those who wore the other rings, bending them to his will without their knowing, whispering into their minds, binding them to his unseen hand. And then, at last, he placed it upon his finger. Across Middle-earth, the elves who had donned their rings of power felt it instantly. a great and terrible presence, reaching for them, seeking to ensnare their thoughts, their will. It came without warning, an unseen voice pressing into their minds, pulling them toward something vast and dark. In that moment, the deception was laid bare. Sauron had betrayed them. They tore their rings from their fingers, severing the connection before it could take hold. In that single act, they defied him, but the damage had already been done. They had learned too late that their greatest works had never been truly theirs. That from the very beginning, they had been working toward his design. The realization struck like a hammer blow. They had been deceived, not by force, but by their own desire to create, to preserve, to hold back the long defeat that time pressed upon them. In Mordor, Sauron raged. His plan had been flawless, his patience unshaken, and yet the elves had resisted him before his will could fully take hold. Though the One Ring had given him mastery over the other rings, that power was useless if its bearers refused to wear them. The elves had slipped from his grasp, but not all of the rings had been made for them. Even as the elves hid their rings away, the others remained untouched, waiting for the moment they would be claimed. The 7 had been made for the dwarves, the 9 for men, and in time they would find their bearers. Through them, Sauron's influence would still spread, his dominion growing in ways even the elves could not foresee. But that was yet to come. For now, Eregion remained standing, its people shaken but unbroken. They had discovered the truth, and in doing so, they had denied Sauron his victory, at least for a time. But he would not suffer this defiance. He would not allow them to wield the rings beyond his reach. Even as the elves sought to hide their rings, to keep them safe from the Dark Lord's grasp, he was already preparing his next move. He would not allow them to escape his wrath. He would march upon Eregion himself, and when he did, he would claim what was his. The war was coming, and this time there would be no deception. Only fire, ruin, and blood. Sauron's wrath was swift. The elves had defied him, removing their rings before his will could take hold, and in doing so, they had shattered the plan he had so carefully constructed. No longer would he hide behind fair words and gentle persuasion. If they would not submit to him willingly, he would take from them everything they held dear. From the black lands of Mordor, a great host arose, legions of orcs, twisted creatures of war, and foul things bred for destruction. They marched with fire and ruin, led by Sauron himself, and their path was set straight for Eregion. There would be no mercy, no quarter. The time for deception had passed. The elves of Eregion were strong, skilled in both craft and arms. But they were not prepared for the full might of the Dark Lord. His armies fell upon them with relentless fury. sweeping through the land and laying waste to all in their path. Towns and villages burned, their people fleeing toward the western mountains, seeking refuge beyond the grasp of war. At the heart of Eregion stood Ost in Edel, the city of the Gwarthe Myrdain, where Celebrimbor and his smiths had forged the rings of power. Its walls were strong, and its warriors fought with desperate valor. But the enemy was endless, their numbers beyond counting. The sky blackened with smoke, the air filled with the cries of battle, and the streets ran red with the blood of the fallen. For days, the elves held their ground, but one by one, the outer defenses crumbled. Sauron himself led the assault, driving his forces forward with ruthless precision. The gates of Ost in Edel shattered under his command, and at last the Dark Lord strode into the city, his presence a shadow upon the broken ruins of Eregion's pride. At the heart of the stronghold, Celebrimbor stood alone. His people lay scattered or slain, his forges broken, his life's work on the brink of ruin. But in his hands, he held something Sauron could not yet claim, knowledge. He alone knew the fates of the rings of power, where they had been sent, who now held them. And so Sauron did not kill him, not yet. He took the Master Smith captive, torturing him for the truth. The Seven and the Nine, those he learned of quickly enough. They had not been hidden away, and in the aftermath of the battle, they fell into his hands. But the 3 elven rings, those were beyond his reach. Celebrimbor refused to speak. Though his body was broken, his spirit did not waver. He would not betray what remained of his people, nor would he hand Sauron the final key to his dominion. And so, at last, the Dark Lord cast him aside. His broken body was nailed to the gates of the city, a grim banner for all to see. A warning to those who still dared to resist. Yet even as Eregion burned, all was not lost. Word of Sauron's assault had reached Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor, and he had sent aid. Elrond, leading a host from Lindon, had marched to the defense of Eregion, but they had come too late. When they arrived, the city was already in ruin, its people scattered, its lord slain. Against the full might of Sauron's forces, Elrond's army could not stand. And so he ordered a retreat, leading the survivors northward, away from the slaughter. They fled into the hidden valleys of the Misty Mountains, where, in time, they would lay the foundation of a new refuge, Imladris, later known as Rivendell. As the last remnants of Eregion vanished into the hills, Sauron turned his gaze upon what remained. The rings of power, the objects that had drawn him here, the tools through which he would rule Middle-earth, lay before him. The 7 and the 9 he took for himself, knowing that through them he would weave his influence over the races of dwarves and men. But the 3, the greatest of them, remained beyond his grasp. In the final moments before Eregion fell, the elves had acted swiftly. Gil, Galad, and Galadriel had foreseen the danger, and the three rings had been sent away, hidden where Sauron would never find them. Vilya and Narya had been entrusted to the High King, while Nenya had passed to Galadriel herself. Though Sauron had seized victory on the battlefield, though he had crushed Eregion and shattered the line of its lord, his greatest prize had slipped from his fingers. And so, the war did not end here. He had won a battle, but his dominion was not yet absolute. The elves had suffered a grievous loss, but they had denied him his final triumph. The three rings remained beyond his reach, and through them a spark of resistance endured. Middle-earth had entered a darker age, but not yet an age without hope. Eregion was no more. Its cities lay in ruin, its greatest craftsmen slain or scattered. The forges where wonders had been shaped were cold and broken, and upon the gates of its shattered halls, the lifeless form of Celebrimbor hung as a grim warning to all who would defy the Dark Lord. The war had been swift, and its outcome undeniable. Sauron had seized what he had long sought, the rings of power, or at least most of them. The 9 rings and the 7 rings now rested in his grasp. The elven rings had escaped him, hidden beyond his reach, but he would not dwell on that failure. He had already begun the next phase of his plan. These rings had been made to enhance, to grant their wearers power and longevity. They would serve his purpose still, even if the elves had denied him dominion over their own. Sauron was patient. He did not scatter the 9 rings at once, nor did he bestow them upon unworthy hands. He sought out those whose hearts were already drawn to power, those whose ambitions burned brightly, those who would see the rings not as gifts, but as the keys to immortality and dominion. One by one, they accepted his gifts. Mighty kings, great warriors, sorcerers of renown, each a ruler in their own right, each believing the ring they bore would bring them glory beyond their years. And in the beginning, it did. The 9 rings extended their lifespans, granting them wisdom and strength beyond the reckoning of ordinary men. They became lords of great kingdoms, unmatched in skill and leadership. They gathered wealth, commanded armies, and shaped the lands they ruled. But power, when given freely, is never without price. The gifts became chains. Over time, the kings who had once ruled with pride became shadows of themselves, their wills no longer their own. They had gained unnatural life, but at the cost of their very being. They walked unseen between worlds, slipping between the realm of flesh and the wraith world, where the whispers of their master grew ever louder. They could not resist him. Their rings had bound them to him from the moment they had accepted them. And so, one by one, they faded into darkness, losing their names, their identities, their very souls. They became the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths, slaves to Sauron's will. The fate of the Seven Rings was different. They, too, were given to lords of great renown, but their bearers were not so easily dominated. The dwarves were a race apart from men and elves, shaped by Aule himself, resistant to the corrupting whispers of Sauron. They did not seek power over others, nor did they hunger for immortality. Their desires lay elsewhere. To the dwarves, the Seven Rings were treasures beyond price. They enhanced their natural craft, bringing wealth beyond measure to their halls. Gold and gems flowed in abundance, their mines growing deeper, their hoards ever greater. But this wealth came at a cost. The rings did not grant the dwarves unnatural life, nor did they bend their wills to Sauron's control. But they amplified their greed, driving them to hoard and covet, to dig deeper, to never be satisfied with what they had. Their kings became obsessed with their wealth, their halls filled with riches beyond reckoning. Yet still, they desired more, and with great treasure came great danger. Where gold was gathered in excess, dragons were drawn. The great worms of Middle-earth, with their insatiable hunger for treasure, came forth from their lairs, lured by the hoards amassed under the mountains. One by one, the great dwarven kingdoms fell, consumed by dragonfire, their wealth stolen, their people scattered. Sauron had not enslaved the dwarves as he had men, but their rings had still served his purpose. Their kingdoms were diminished, their strength weakened, their wealth turned against them. And though some of the Seven Rings survived, others were lost forever in the bellies of dragons. Though Sauron had claimed the Nine and the Seven, the three elven rings remained beyond his grasp. Unlike the others, these rings had been forged without his direct influence, and so they remained untainted by his will. They had been made not for dominion, but for preservation, and those who bore them sought not power, but the protection of what remained of elven kind. The three rings had been hidden away in the chaos of war. Gil-galad held Vilya, the mightiest of the three. Galadriel bore Nenya, the Ring of Water, its power bound to the beauty of Lothlorien. And in secret, Narya, the Ring of Fire, would find its way to Círdan the Shipwright, though its fate would not yet be revealed. Though the elves dared not wear their rings openly, their time would come. And unlike the others, these rings would not bring ruin to their bearers, but instead serve as a final bastion of light against the growing darkness. With the rings now scattered among elves, dwarves, and men, the stage was set for the ages to come. Sauron had not gained full dominion over Middle-earth, but he had woven the seeds of his influence into the world. The Nazgul would rise, the dwarves would struggle, and the elves would fight to preserve what little they could. The rings of power had been meant to shape the world, but they had instead twisted its fate, binding all who bore them into a struggle that would last until the very end of the age. The rings of power had been scattered across Middle-earth, their bearers chosen, their fates sealed. No longer were they merely artifacts of craftsmanship, they had become instruments of fate, shaping the course of history in ways even their makers had not foreseen. In the years that followed their forging, the power of the rings grew, and with it, the destinies of elves, men, and dwarves were forever changed. Though Sauron had failed to seize the 3 elven rings, he had still left a mark upon them. The elves, having sensed his influence through the One Ring, dared not wear them openly, for even without his hand upon them, they were still bound to his power. Yet, in time, as Sauron turned his attention elsewhere, the rings found their purpose. The keepers of the 3 became guardians of what remained of the elven realms. Vilya, the Ring of Air, passed from Gil-galad to Elrond, strengthening Rivendell as a sanctuary of wisdom and healing. Nenya, the Ring of Water, remained with Galadriel, shielding Lothlorien from time's decay and preserving its golden beauty. Narya, the Ring of Fire, would eventually pass into the hands of Gandalf, its unseen influence igniting hope and resilience in the hearts of those who still fought against the darkness. Through these rings, the elves delayed the inevitable. Their realms flourished, untouched by the slow decay of Middle-earth, lingering as echoes of an older world. Yet, the rings could not halt fate, only slow it. As the years passed, the elves grew weary, longing ever more for the undying lands beyond the sea. The rings that once preserved their strength became reminders of what they had lost, of a world that could never be as it once was. The 7 rings of the dwarves had never granted their bearers the dominion Sauron had intended, but their influence had twisted the fate of their kind in ways just as destructive. The lords of the dwarves, already strong-willed and fiercely independent, became ever more consumed by their wealth. The rings amplified their greatest desire, to hoard riches beyond measure, and through this they became ensnared. The wealth of the dwarves became legend, but so too did their misfortune. Where treasure was hoarded, dragons were drawn. One by one, the great dwarven strongholds fell, their golden halls consumed by fire and ruin. Thrain II, heir of Durin's line, was the last known bearer of a dwarven ring. But even he was eventually captured by Sauron, his ring taken, his mind broken. Of the 7, some were lost to the flames, swallowed by the greed of the great Wyrms. Others fell into Sauron's hands, returning to the master who had forged them. The dwarves had not been enslaved as men had, but they had still suffered under the weight of the ring's influence. While the dwarves resisted and the elves endured, the 9 rings of men had already sealed their bearers' fates. The kings and lords who had once ruled mighty realms had long since vanished into the shadows, their names lost to time. What remained of them were no longer men, but wraiths, slaves to the will of Sauron. Bound to the One Ring, the Nazgul had become Sauron's most feared and loyal servants. No kingdom could rise against them, no blade could strike them down, for they existed between the worlds of the living and the dead. When Sauron's power waned, they drifted into the unseen, waiting. When he stirred again, they answered his call without question. They were no longer kings nor men. They were specters of fear, and their presence alone was enough to bring terror to even the bravest of warriors. And yet, for all the power Sauron had gathered, his greatest weapon had been lost. The One Ring, the keystone of his dominion, had slipped from his grasp, vanishing into obscurity. Without it, he could not fully command the wills of those who bore the other rings. He could influence them, whisper to them, bend them toward his designs, but his mastery was incomplete. Its absence shaped the world just as surely as its presence would have. Without it, Sauron was not invincible, and the free peoples had time to rebuild, to resist, to prepare for what was to come. But the ring was not gone forever. It lay waiting, lost in the currents of time, biding its moment to return to the world. The rings of power had been meant to preserve, to strengthen, to rule. But they had done none of these things as their makers had intended. The elves, though their realm stood, could not hold back the slow fading of their people. The dwarves, though unbowed, had seen their greatest halls laid to ruin by the greed the rings had instilled in them. And men, ever ambitious, had found only servitude in the gifts they had accepted. The world had changed. The Second Age had come to an end, and the Third Age had begun. Sauron had been cast down once more, but not destroyed. The kingdoms of Middle-earth had reshaped themselves, each bearing the weight of the past. The rings remained, scattered, waiting. The shadows had not yet fully risen, but they had not disappeared either. In time, the world would come to know their power once more. And so, dear traveler, our journey through the tale of the rings of power comes to a gentle close. The fires of the great forges have long since cooled, and the echoes of hammer and anvil fade into the quiet of time. The world we have walked tonight is vast and ancient, filled with stories that stretch beyond the ages. Yet even the greatest of tales must find their place in the hush of the evening. The rings, scattered across Middle-earth, have left their mark. Some as whispers in the wind, others as shadows that linger long after the light has passed. But here, beneath the endless sky, there is peace. The stars shine as they always have, unmoved by the rise and fall of kings, undimmed by the passing of ages. Their gentle glow has watched over elves and men, over mountains and rivers, over lands both lost and remembered. And now they watch over you, cradling you in the quiet comfort of the night. Let your mind drift like a leaf upon a slow-moving stream, carried gently toward rest. Picture the golden woods of Lothlorien, where silver moonlight dances upon still waters. Imagine the rolling green hills of the Shire, where soft lantern light glows behind round doors, where distant laughter fades into the hush of slumber. Feel the warmth of an unseen fire, the steady crackling of embers, the soft lull of the wind outside. There is no more need for waking thoughts, no more need for wandering, for now all is still. The stories will wait for another day, just as the stars will shine again when the sun sets tomorrow. You are safe, wrapped in the quiet embrace of night, where dreams flow like whispered tales from another time. Close your eyes, breathe in deeply. Let the weight of the day fall away like autumn leaves in the wind. Rest now, as if carried across the sea on gentle waves, rocking softly toward a distant shore where the air is warm and the sky is golden. Sleep well, dear traveler, beneath the watchful stars, and may your dreams be filled with golden light, with soft voices singing in forgotten tongues, with the gentle touch of time long past. Good night, and may peace follow you into your dreams.